Matthew 16. When they came to Capernaum, the collectors of the half-shekel tax went up to Peter and said, "Does your teacher pay the tax? The tax, put that in your spirit, the tax." He said, "Yes." And when he came home, Jesus spoke to him first, saying, "What do you think, Simon? From whom do the kings of the earth take toll or tribute? From their sons or from others?" Okay. Now let's explain the temple tax. The temple tax is a tax that all adult male Hebrews were required to pay to the temple for the upkeep and maintenance of the sacrificial cult. Every adult male had to pay this. We see that in Exodus 30. Yah spoke to Moshe, saying, "When you take the sum of the children of Israel according to their numbers, let each one give to Yah an atonement for his soul. When they are counted, then there will be no plague among them when they are counted. This they shall give, everyone who goes through the counting, half a shekel, according to the holy shekel. 20 gerahs equal 1 shekel. Half of such a shekel shall be an offering to Yah. Everyone who goes through the counting from the age of 20 and upward shall give an offering to Yah." So, what this legislation is telling us in the book of Exodus is that each adult Hebrew male was required to pay this half shekel tax to the Jerusalem temple upon attaining adulthood. Put that in your spirit. Okay. Now, Yeshua is asked whether he pays the temple tax. He says he does. Okay. Now we come to Matthew 21. "And Yeshua entered the temple and drove out all who sold and bought in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seat of those who sold pigeons. He said to them, 'It is written, my house shall be called a house of prayer, but you make it a den of robbers, a den of thieves.'" Honestly, Yeshua's action here doesn't make any sense. Why do I say that? I'll explain. Most modern readers of this passage understand it as meaning that Yeshua was opposed to commercial activity in the area of the temple, and that motivated him to overturn the temples of the money changers. That is completely incorrect, because that was what the temple was used for. Remember, the temple is a bank. That's where people save their money. We have evidence that the temples in the ancient world served these purposes as well. So it could not be that he was protesting something that was the norm. There must have been something else that triggers his behavior here. To decipher that, we have to understand what we mean by temple here. He says, "And Yeshua entered the temple." We have to understand what that means. The word temple in passages like this can refer either to the actual temple building or the Temple Mount complex. What is the Temple Mount complex? The temple building is where you have the Holy of Holies, where you have the where ordinary people cannot go, where Gentiles cannot go, actually. Okay. The Temple Mount complex is the giant open paved walkway. I'll show you a picture soon. In the midst of the temple, or in the midst of where the temple building stood. So in this passage, the reference is not strictly speaking to the actual temple building, but rather to the entire Temple Mount complex. Let me put the complex there so it doesn't confuse us. Gentiles were allowed on the Temple Mount complex. This open area, they are allowed, but they were not allowed into the temple building itself. So when you see the picture on my screen, you see where it says the court of the Gentiles. That is the Temple Mount complex. That is the open area. I showed you a drawing and then a sketch with the labeling of it, where it says the court of the Gentiles. That is the Temple Mount complex. The Gentiles can come in there. People can walk in there. They cannot go into the temple building itself. This is why Paul was arrested, because the report was that Paul took a Gentile into the temple building itself, which was not allowed. But Gentiles were allowed onto the Temple Mount complex. So it means that, if you can picture it, when you walk, when we talk about the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, it's a giant, open, paved space. It was paved. That has porches surrounded it on the sides to provide shelter for the pilgrims from the sun and rain, and a big congregational building at one end. And then standing in the middle of it, like you see in the picture, was the temple building itself. And this big open paved space was actually a center for commercial activities. That is what they did. You bought and you sold here. So it is difficult to understand Yeshua's overturning of the tables of the money changers as an opposition to commercial activity on the Temple Mount. It couldn't be, because that's what they did. Where would you buy your pigeon, your goat? When you travel the long distance, you buy it there and then you do what you have to do with it. This was the characteristic feature of all ancient temple complexes. They were all surrounded by areas of commercial activity. And everybody living at that time, or living in that world, in that period, took for granted that you had commercial activity surrounding the actual temple building. So that is not the reason why Jesus was objecting to the money changes, etc. What was his objection? It had to do with the nature of the temple tax and why there were money changers actually on top of the Temple Mount. Why were they there? Why were money changers there? Even if you have commercial activity, why have tables of money changers? That is where his protest comes from. The reason for the money changers which he opposed, is that the temple complex, in addition to being an area of commercial activity, was a place where these travelers, these pilgrims, came for these holidays that they had to 3 times a year travel to Jerusalem for. And when they are coming, they would have to pay the temple tax. Yes, so the money changes became a norm because of what I'm about to explain. It became a norm. It wasn't, but it became a norm. The reason is because these people have to pay the temple tax. Now, originally, the temple tax, as mandated in the book of Exodus, was a one-time payment. You paid it once. So you paid this tax when you became an adult as a Hebrew man. Women did not pay it. Men paid it. The temple tax. It was a one-time payment. You paid this tax when you became an adult. Now, under the Hasmoneans, the Maccabees, it became an annual tax. Instead of the one-time payment, it became annual. So the Hasmoneans changed this and required adult men to pay the tax on an annual basis. Making this an annual tax aroused a great deal of opposition among the Hebrew population or the Judean population. Not only among Yeshua and his followers, but also among groups like the Essenes. They also were against this. So this is the first thing that would have triggered Yeshua. There was another Hasmonean legislation that the temple tax had to be paid in a certain kind of currency, a certain coin, what we call Tyrian tetradrachmos, the silver shekel. This is the only currency that was accepted for the temple tax. The silver shekel. This was a kind of silver coin that the silver content was very high. It would tell you why this is what they wanted. It's a very pure silver coin. So it means that Madam Cynthia cannot bring her British pound sterling and pay for the temple tax, which was supposed to be once a year, once a lifetime, but now they're taking it annually. And even though they're taking it annually, you can only pay with this special silver coin because its silver content was high. Not so that it makes the coin holy, no. It just makes it expensive. So now we're talking exchange rate, correct? So now, Madam Cynthia is for one silver shekel, she's paying maybe 10 pounds sterling for it. The next year she comes as 12 pounds sterling. The other year now is 15 pounds sterling for a silver shekel. You see the problem. Who does that affect? It affects the poor. So now these travelers, these pilgrims coming to the temple, would have needed to exchange currency to pay the temple tax in this kind of coin. And Yeshua is opposed to this annual payment of the tax, but also he's opposed to it because the poor, the people who were vulnerable, who were his main audience, this would have been a real hardship on them, which would be majority of the Judean population. So when Yeshua is doing this in the temple, he's not doing it because the people were buying and selling in the Temple Mount complex. That's what they did. The issue was the laws that were passed by the Hasmoneans when something that was a lifetime, once in a lifetime, became annually. Not only annually, now you have to buy this silver coin, and that's the one that you use to pay, and you jacking up the prices, the exchange rate. So he has a concern for the widow, the orphan, the stranger. He has a concern for the poor. That is why he's turning over the tables. Now, coming from the historical background, now it begins to make sense. It couldn't be because they were selling. No, that was done. It's because of the Tyrian tetradrachmas, the silver shekel. This is how you use historical information, historical data, to let the text actually speak to us. Awesome. So we should take care of the widow, the poor, the fatherless, the orphan. We should not take advantage of them. We should help them as much as possible because most of the time they don't have anyone to lean on but the community.